we were kind of a force to be reckoned with. The boys in the engineering school could never figure out which one was Shelley and which was Dianne. It was Shelley, Dianne. I mean, we couldn't have looked more different. You'd think they could have kept our names straight, but nope. They called me Shelley, they called her Dianne. But I think that also was powerful, that we were a team, and they saw us as a team. We were just pushing forward, doing what we believed in, and that's how come it worked.
Welcome to the Fora Podcast, a space where real people share real stories. Every episode opens a door into someone else's world with unexpected turns and honest moments that spark connection. I'm Cheryl Crupi, mom, writer, athlete, and artist. I'm curious about what connects us, and I believe every person holds something unexpected and beautiful.
And I'm Kenan, dad and coach. I'm passionate about doing hard things. My favorite way to learn is by listening to people and their stories. Welcome, Fora listeners. I'm your host, Kenan, and I'm here with my co-host, Cheryl Crupi. Today, our guest is a computer science and educator with global reach. She's the former vice provost for faculty affairs at George Washington University. She's currently a professor of computer sciences at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She's also a woman of faith. Dianne Martin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
How you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Love that. Cheryl, how are you?
I'm great. Do you think we should say that she's my aunt?
We most definitely should mention that she is your aunt.
She is my aunt. I'm so delighted to have you here, Aunt Dianne.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. And you can just call me Dianne while we're doing this.
When Dianne and I spoke on the phone, I asked her what I should call her because you refer to her as Aunt Dianne. She's Dr. Martin, I'm assuming, to your students. And she said it'd be a little funny if I called her Aunt Dianne. So we'll just stick with Dianne.
All right, I'll do my best.
All right. So you've had a career in computer sciences that has spanned over 6 decades. Is that correct?
Yes.
Incredible. I think we just go right into the Apollo missions at NASA. What years were you involved in that project and what was your role there?
I was involved in the Apollo project from 1967 to 1969. That would have included Apollo 8 and Apollo 11. Apollo 8 was when they first went around the moon, and Apollo 11 was when they actually landed on the moon. And so it was very exciting times. I was a programmer. I had been recruited by IBM because I'd been a math major as an undergraduate, was recruited to become a programmer, which I did. And it was just really exciting to work on that project and be able to observe during the missions when they were doing the various missions that we were programming from the observation tower. Yeah.
I have so many questions. I'll start with what were the things that you were doing specifically?
Well, actually, I should say I was a junior programmer. I think I was promoted to programmer by the time I got on the Apollo project, actually. But because I'd had a math major, I was doing some of the mathematical programming. Some great math had been developed to allow the Apollo missions to go forward, and I was one of the programmers that helped program those into the computer to track the spaceship. Another program had to do with managing the input data that was coming in from all the radar stations from all over the globe, because as the Earth turns, different radar stations would have the data coming in that was tracking the ship, and so that my program would be capturing that data.
So your program had to adapt to a lot of different variables that come into play when you're trying to get to the moon.
Right, and this was a time when we're talking about large mainframe computers. This was the first kind of attempt at real-time programming with very limited memory compared to what we have nowadays. And so it was quite an art to be able to do these programs in little packages that had to sort of be shuffled in and out of memory because the memory wasn't big enough to hold all of the programs. And so the programs would be shuffled in and out as needed depending upon where you were in the mission. And of course, you would turn programs in on punched cards. It wasn't like you typed things in and immediately knew you had a bug. You had to wait for 4 hours, sometimes 8 hours, and then you would fix the bug, and then you would punch the cards, and you would turn them back in again. We got the men on the moon using punch cards.
So can we make a point of comparison? I think my phone, if I'm not mistaken, it's an iPhone 15. I think it has something like 256 gigs available on the phone itself. What amount of memory did you have available to you?
Not even a gig, way less than that. We're talking just megabytes of memory. It was a very small amount of memory compared to what we have nowadays. And so we had these huge machines. Tapes were rolling all the time as programs were rolling in and rolling out into the computer.
I'm just curious what it was like to be a programmer then. Did you work in teams?
Well, we were each given assignments, and we would all do our work, and then we would come together, and the programs all had to work together. So in a sense, you were a team, but the programming in those days was much more lone programmers. Now it's much more of a team effort, and it might have been good if it had been back in those days, but then everyone was given their part, and we all wrote our pieces of the program, and then they were all pulled together. And so each person had to debug their piece and then pull it together for the mission. And actually, there were two sets of programmers because I was at the Goddard Space Center in Washington, D.C. There was another whole set of programmers in Houston. And this was an interesting sort of redundancy where they actually had two programming teams writing the mission. Both sets of programs would track the mission so that if there was a bug in one set of programs during the mission, they could flip back and forth between so that one bug couldn't bring the mission down, basically.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but your punch cards would have been different. It would have been technically different programs, but accomplishing the same task.
Yes.
Having spent my entire career in tech, I can't even imagine how you would handle integration.
Also, specifically, your expertise is integrating teams and getting people to work together.
Yeah, agility and, DevOps, all those things those are all sort of new tech terms. But what you're describing, I'm just imagining what it's like to work in such a sort of a rudimentary way, and also to know that people's lives depended on you getting it right.
Yes.
I'm also really curious what it was like to be a woman in that field at that time. Did you feel like it mattered that you were a woman?
I think I was just excited to be on the project and focused on doing the programming. There was one other woman that I remember, but I feel like there must have been another one. But at least in the immediate area where I was, there were only two of us that were working with mostly male colleagues. And it was a big project, so there were lots of different groups of people.
And what was that like coming out of college, being in your early 20s?
Well, fortunately, we had very good, friendly male colleagues, so it wasn't too bad. I imagine it could have been worse if some of the male colleagues had not been that way, but they were good, and we all just worked together as a team.
What drew you into computer science in the first place?
Well, I had been a math major, actually a math and economics major as an undergraduate, and I had taught 1 year of high school math. I had to fulfill a teaching obligation. I was hearing about the computer field, and because I loved logic, and I just felt like it was something that I'd be interested in. So when I went to work for IBM and started programming, I absolutely did love it. But the interesting thing is they took us and trained us because there was no computer science program. So I was in a training program to be taught how to program in several different programming languages. And my immediate reaction was, wow, this is so much fun. I want to teach this. I just had this idea that eventually I would want to be a computer teacher because I could see some of the flaws in the way we were being taught. And I'm thinking there are probably better ways to teach this. Teaching is my passion, really.
I love that. One of my earliest school memories as a little girl, and probably kindergarten or first grade, was learning about computers. And we literally took, it's probably like a refrigerator box, and we painted it to look like a computer. And we took index cards and put questions on one set of cards and answers on the other set of cards. And we stuck them in little trays. And you were meant to like pull a card out and then read the question and then pull a card out of the other side of the box and that it would answer it. And this was trying to teach us, I guess, to imagine what it would be like to have a computer, just make it real. What do you think of that as a demonstration of how computers work? I mean, we were trying to make them real to people.
Well, of course, you have seen my book, Bits and Bytes about computers, and we do actually have a way to teach kids how computers work. And it's a little bit more advanced than what you're talking about, but it really is having one kid be the input, one kid be the output, several kids lined up and they're the memory, and we have the CPU who's the boss. And so we do teach children, and this is fundamentally how computers still work. So it is possible to teach even young children. The idea is to give them a conceptual model. It doesn't have to be the actual wires and that kind of thing. It's really a conceptual model of what's going on.
I remember that experience and thinking, this is entirely impossible. I mean, the cards could get shuffled, right? And then the answers would always be wrong.
Well, what they didn't illustrate was the notion of memory, that back behind that board, behind those slots, there were little mailboxes. And you would be putting things in the correct mailbox and taking the answer out of the correct. It was the idea of the mailboxes, the memory that was missing in that little model that you were doing.
Yeah, I can see that And I'm imagining that from a very early time in your career that you were building mental models that helped people learn how both these technologies might work and also how they might interact with them. And that's what was missing in that model, right? I mean, as a first grader or a kindergartner, I looked at that and thought, this will never work. There's no way to keep the two sets of cards correlated.
There's a thing I want to do throughout this podcast, which is I'm going to pull some quotations here and there from your book, Bits and Bytes, that you just mentioned. Now, I want our listeners to remember, when was this book written and published?
Came out in like 1982.
Okay. Keep 1982 in your mind when we quote this book, and you can decide for yourself how pertinent or not this information is or not. I'll read one right now. In spite of the proliferation of computers throughout our society, there remains a large segment of the population which is computer illiterate. As a result, this lack of knowledge and understanding leads to misconceptions, anxieties, and distorted expectations about what computers can be made to do and what they cannot be made to do. It is essential that the growing disparity between the haves and have-nots of computing literacy be addressed. I don't think that's changed. In many ways, even for me, looking at this laptop I have right here, or this podcasting equipment I've got right here, it's a magic black box where I ask it to do things or press little buttons and it just produces things. Like computer graphics for me, it seems like magic. So you've made a whole career out of helping people demystify that, starting with very basic examples and thinking in theories and principles. Is that fair?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that. So you were at Apollo.
Yes.
I feel like we could just talk about that for an hour, but I want to get to some of the bigger concepts. So you're there. What happens after the Apollo missions?
So what happens is I have a baby. And actually, that baby comes right around the time of Apollo 11, which means I have to leave IBM 3 weeks before the actual Apollo 11 mission. You know, I don't want to be up in mission control in the observation tower pregnant. So I had to leave.
Is that a concern that you would like go into labor and then there would be an emergency?
Well, who knows?
Okay.
Who knows? That was back in, back in the 60s. So I actually watched the Apollo mission on television like everybody else did, although I knew that I had been part of it. So I would have loved to have gone back and worked part-time for IBM, but they wouldn't allow women to work part-time, which another friend of mine, which we'll talk about in a moment, the same thing happened to her when she had a baby. So what I was doing, I had started graduate school at that point, thanks to IBM, in computer science. So I took the time then to finish my master's degree in computer science and really start to get involved in the computer field. I taught at the University of Maryland for 7 years before I ended up at George Washington University. So I really got into the computer field and computer science and teaching computer science. So it was great. Eventually had wanted to be a teacher anyway, so that's what I ended up doing.
What was it about teaching that called you?
It still does. I mean, I just enjoy seeing people light up when they understand something, when they think about something for the first time or they have an understanding for the first time and they make those connections. That's a passion for mine. I love seeing that in people.
Another question I have, so that little girl that I was with that refrigerator box that was supposed to be a computer, I had disbelief. I know from reading some of your writings that people's perspective, belief, disbelief, or belief that technology can make their lives better. How did you know that these technologies were going to be a good thing?
Well, I knew that they could be a good thing or a bad thing. In the process of doing my master's degree, I did take one course from this visiting professor sort of on computers and society and looking at unintended consequences and sort of seeing that whole area. And at that time, teaching ethics was not part of computer science. And so the whole idea of adding something into the computer science curriculum that would include consequences and ethics became something that was very important to me. Computers can make things better, but they can also do a lot of harm. So both sides, the two sides of the coin, and helping people become aware of that, particularly the people who are developing the systems. To me, it was very important that computer science students that I educated would go out in the world and have an awareness that they had to worry about the impact of the systems they were creating, worry about the users who were going to use those systems, because that had not been paramount in people's thinking in the beginning of computing.
That's very interesting. I mean, core to all software development now is the user in the center.
Exactly. That wasn't even added into the ethics codes until the more recent iterations of the professional society ethics codes. In the early ethics codes, it was more about being competent in what you're doing, the productivity, responsibility to man it to the company. And they eventually started worrying about users and the impact on users, and bringing users into the design process became important. That was something that came out like in the 80s and 90s. That was not in the early computer systems.
So how did people, I'm thinking of you as a young woman with all these punch cards and encoding them and waiting 4 to 8 hours to get your feedback back. How did humans interact with those punch cards? Like, what happened to the punch cards? What did you do with them?
Well, the punch cards were turned into a card reader, and the card reader then would read them, and so they were turned into bits and bytes inside of the computer. They were turned into electronic impulses, and the little punches, represented zeros and ones, essentially.
Wow, there must have been so many of them.
Well, we were coding in a high-level language, which then got interpreted within the machine into the basic zeros and ones of the machine language. So all of this took place over just a couple of decades in computer science, the whole development of high-level programming languages. And if you look at the initial pictures of ENIAC, the first electronic computer, people were plugging things in and out. It wasn't until some like Fortran, which was a mathematical language, and COBOL, which is a business language. And these are high-level languages that are English-like for us humans, but they have to be translated into the computer eventually back down into just zeros and ones inside of the computer.
So to its core, your career has been translating.
I guess so, yeah.
So working on the Apollo missions is a small group of people. Being a woman working on the Apollo missions, even smaller group of people. A mother, smaller group. Someone who continues with a passion towards education, towards computer sciences. We're narrowing it down. And yet there is somebody out there who is basically living a parallel life to you. Shelley. Can you tell us about Shelley?
Well, we're talking about Shelley Heller. So Shelley and I met in graduate school, both at the University of Maryland, and we were in several courses together. I think we may have had the same actual academic advisor as well. But Shelley actually saved me because there was one math course, a computer math course, that I had not taken as part of the curriculum because I was able to opt out because I'd been a math major. But I should have taken. Shelley let me use all of her notes, and she actually kind of coached me so that we both passed the comprehensive exam and we both got our computer science degree at the same time. But as a result of that, we became just very close friends. The irony is that in one sense we were very different, but we were also very much alike. Shelley was a young mother. She actually had 2 children at the time that I had 1, and we each had our next child at the same time, so that then I had 2, and she had 3 boys. I had a girl and a boy. But she was Jewish, and I was Christian. But I think actually our faith is what made us even closer, because she was a practicing observant Jew and I was a practicing observant Christian. And I think with our faith and with our sort of religious integrity, we just had a great respect for each other. And even today, if I'm reading the Psalms and I have a question, I'll shoot an email to Shelley to find out, what does this say in Hebrew? So we have literally shared our careers as well as our faith, even though we each practice a different form of the faith over 50 years now. Yeah.
That's incredible, because you met Shelley in grad school, but you were both working.
We were both working for IBM. She was working in a different division than I was in IBM. I was in the Federal Systems Division. She was in I think it was the business division. So we were both programmers, but we didn't know each other when we were both at IBM. We met in graduate school, both of which was paid for by IBM, both of our graduate schools. Yeah.
So with Shelley, you described a little bit of what brought you together, especially faith being integral to that. How long did you two work together?
Well, we were both teaching at the University of Maryland. We were both teaching these huge introductory programming courses. And we were both interested in computers and education because we had kids and we were seeing friends that we knew who had older children, and the kids were starting to do computers in schools, and the poor teachers didn't have a clue about what to do with computers. I mean, it was a interesting time. We started talking about what our own interest in how would you bring computers into the schools and what could we do. We went to a computer education conference, and on the way back from the conference, Shelley was driving and I was taking notes, and we basically wrote the outline to bits and bytes about computing. We just decided we were going to write this book because there were no good materials for teachers. So the book is for teachers, to teach them, because at that time, computers were just being sort of donated to schools, stuck in the schools, and the teachers did not know what to do with them. Now, the rich school districts had the capacity to do all kinds of fancy teacher training. The poor school districts did not. They tended to just set up one computer lab with one teacher who was trained, throw the kids in the lab one period a day. And it was just a totally different model in the way that computers were being used with children, and so much inequity going on. And so we just wanted to tackle helping teachers become comfortable, but also introducing good models for how you could use computers with kids, which is how we ended up getting invited to Russia to talk about the Soviet Academy of Science, about how we were doing it in the U.S.
So before we go to Russia, I'm curious about your outreach in the city you were living in Washington, D.C., in these schools that did not have the resources. How did you open that door?
Well, we were invited to do workshops in many of the area school districts. In fact, New Jersey, we were invited in many different places to do some of these workshops because of the book that we had written. The Smithsonian even had us come one day and do a workshop in front of 500 people, adults, who all wanted to do what Kenan wanted to do, learn about computers. And it worked out. It was actually a lot of fun. So we just started to do what we could. We also, by then, I had transitioned over to George Washington University. Shelley eventually came. When we got to GW, we started writing grants. One of them was to help minority women. Another was to help middle school teachers. So we started writing grants to help learn how to use computers and to become more computer and science literate, basically.
I'm curious, just looking in today's world at AI and the various different responses to AI, I imagine that some of the people that you wanted to reach out to were eager and some were not.
Yes.
How did you bridge that gap?
Well, we would go into a school district, and of course, we'd been hired by the administration to come into the school district. So as you say, some of the teachers were excited to be there, and some of the teachers were ready to turn in their resignation. We were just so interesting and compelling and reassuring, I think, to the teachers. Because of the way we were able to introduce the material, I think it just reassured them that, oh, gosh, I can do this. This isn't as hard as I thought it was. We sort of demystified it, really.
I would say if you do have an interest in computers and this is grabbing your attention, check out the book. It's a manual for teachers. I would say the chapter headings themselves really dive into just the really important basic concepts and will challenge the way you think about computers. I'm going to quote the book here. One of the most serious issues to be faced in the coming decade is that of equity in the distribution of computing knowledge and computing power. The haves and the have-nots of the future will be those who have computing knowledge and power as opposed to those who do not. Now, I have a question about that. It mentions computing knowledge and computing power. Is power still an issue? Because it seems like computing power is pretty cheap nowadays. Would you agree with that?
Yes. And the kids in the schools now are issued Chromebooks. So most kids actually have computers they can take home, which is great. Probably the access point now is more access to the internet. Everyone may have a Chromebook, but when they get home, they may not have access to the internet because their family can't afford access, or they live in a remote area where there isn't good access. So I think access is still an issue, but it's a different kind of access now.
Okay. How would you define that term?
I think now computing knowledge is knowing how to use a computer as a tool to do whatever it is you need to do to be able to get a good job, for example. People who know how to use computers definitely can get better jobs than people who don't have any access or knowledge about computers. So I think it really is an access to employment. So the knowledge part, how to use it, it's a tool. There's nothing magic about it. It's just, how can I use it as a tool to get the job done? People are now using AI as part of their toolkit, for example.
I won't broach that subject now, but I think we should get to it later. I'm referring to an article you wrote that I read in a journal about people's attitudes towards computers, and one of the pervasive attitudes, this was written in 1993, it cited studies from the 50s about people's attitudes towards computers, and one of the big concerns was being replaced by computers. I think we can agree that hasn't gone away, right? No. Especially with AI.
I have a question. As someone who's really sort of on the sharp, pointy tip of the spear with AI in my own job, which is as an educator of people in the tech field, I'm struck by, reading these studies and seeing the similarities between what people were saying in the 40s about technology and the 60s about technology. And I'm curious if you have encouragements for people. People are afraid right now that this massive storm of AI is taking us over, that it will result to mass job loss, replace of human thinking, dehumanization of fields that are very human, like medicine. From your many decades of experience, do you have any encouragements or advice for us facing this
Well, I think people should learn as much about computers as they can so that they are not uninformed. They need to be informed about what's going on. I think there are a lot of concerns about AI because I think it's being developed without any guardrails. And, I worry about the ethics around how some of it's being developed, the way AI is being trained just on all the junk out on the internet is not necessarily a good thing because all of the human biases are showing up now in the AI because it's just being trained on all this information that humans have put out on the internet. And so I worry about the bias that is already coming up in AI, and I do worry about some of the job loss. In the past, often the job loss, there has been job loss, but then there's been transitions to new, different kinds of jobs. And so I think there's a certain amount of human ingenuity and human intelligence that won't be replaced. And we just need to, as humans, keep ourselves on top of things.
I was just struck by this idea, two ideas. One is that the AI, it's like a baby. You train it up, so it will become what you train it to become. The other thing is, referring back to that article about people's attitudes, there's these stories that people tell about computers. And one of them is basically that it becomes this wild thing that can't be controlled. And I just had this thought is really, I think what people's fears about computers is that they'll become like a human with its own motivations and with all of the negative aspects of a human personality. I think it just reflects that we're scared of ourselves, really. We're afraid of creating something that is us, flawed. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely being trained based on the best and the worst of what humans create, especially when you see some of the major AI platforms ingesting all the New York Times, for instance, or, it's only as good or as bad as we are. This is such a rich conversation. We could go so many different ways, but I am really drawn by your relationship to Shelley Heller. And having met Shelley as a girl, and knowing how long-running your friendship and your collaboration is, what does that mean to you? What did it mean to you to have a woman who had such strong shared experience walking with you through your career for decades?
Well, I think it was so important, particularly when we were both at George Washington University, we were going through the professor ranks, we were getting tenure, we were going for full professor. We both always had each other's back, and I think that was the important thing. And we kind of reinforced each other. We reinforced the work that we did so that it was better than if it had just been one of us. And I think we were kind of a force to be reckoned with. I mean, the engineering school, the boys in the engineering school could never figure out which one was Shelley and which was Dianne. It was Shelley, Dianne. I mean, we couldn't have looked more different. Shelley had dark curly hair and I was a blonde, and you could think they could have kept our names straight, but nope. They called me Shelley, they called her Dianne. But I think that also was powerful, that we were a team and they saw us as a team. And we started bringing in National Science Foundation grants to the School of Engineering. We started doing things that, although it wasn't engineering and it was multidisciplinary, which is, sometimes a hard sell in a technical department, it was ticking the right boxes so that we were able to get tenure, we were able to get promoted, even though we were definitely outliers. We didn't fit the mold. Not only were we women, but the work we were doing was different. And I actually think the work we were doing was different was because we were women, because we cared about things like ethics. So I got very involved in computer ethics. We cared about things like gender inequity in computer science and bringing more women into science and engineering. And that's what Shelley really focused on. And so I think the work we did was because we were women, but the work we did was also powerful in itself and enough to get us the recognition to be able to get tenure and promoted and so forth.
Did you ever have any major creative difference?
Not really. We had a little bit of different style in the way we worked, but we were very complementary to each other, and it just kind of worked.
Can you tell us how you were complementary? Because right now, Cheryl and I, we could describe ourselves in a similar way. We have very different work styles. We find that we typically converge, though, even if we're working in different ways on the same thing, we converge and we come to the same conclusion very often. What were the specific aspects that made you such a great team so that maybe we and other people listening can think about how they can relate to other people that they're working with to advance something?
I mean, I'm just thinking of like some of the workshops we planned or when we would write a grant. I guess maybe I tended to be more high level and conceptual, and Shelley was very good at drilling down to the details. And so between those two things, you put them both together and you have something that really worked.
How did you challenge each other, or were there ways that you drove each other forward?
I mean, I think we did kind of push each other because of our different styles. And so, the conceptual person kind of puts the next outline together, and then the detailed person drills down. But we both did an equal amount of writing, that was for sure. It wasn't like one person did. We both wrote and corrected each other's writing. And
is Shelley still working? I know you still are.
We're both retired from George Washington University, but she still has some grants that have to do with women in engineering. That actually she's been working in the cybersecurity area, helping to put together programs for students who have federal scholarships in cybersecurity. George Washington University has a cohort of students with scholarships, and she manages that program and brings them all together and does programming for the cybersecurity students.
So I want to take a moment. You've mentioned that your work with Shelley, but especially Shelley's work, was on getting minorities and women involved in computer science. Some people might take it for granted that that's important. Other folks might think, we don't really care who's doing it, whether a minority or not, a woman or not. We just want the best person for the job. So why are we spending time helping specific people in a specific field? Could you tell us why that's important to you and Shelley?
Well, I guess you have to start back with your fundamental definition of who's the best person. And if you think about how the best person has been selected in the past, it's not necessarily been without bias. I mean, they've done all kinds of studies taking a resume and putting different persons' names, a woman's name, a man's name, a name that sounds African American, an Asian name, exact same resume. And some people will get invited to an interview and some people won't. So you can't assume that in the past everything was totally without bias, and those people just got screened out because they weren't qualified, because that's not true. And so I think some of the work we've been doing is just recognizing that there are qualified people who have been screened out or have not been given the opportunity, and given the opportunity, they turn out to be absolutely just as qualified. And in fact, companies that have hired using some of these diversity models have discovered that diverse teams do better. They are more productive. They have way more thinking outside the box and thinking of different cases that a one kind of team that was just one sort of person wouldn't think of. So it actually makes good business sense, good academic sense, to make sure that the playing field is actually level and not biased, and that everyone has opportunity. Yeah.
So if we're thinking about sort of how cutthroat business can be, this isn't necessarily about being fair. It's obviously a beneficial byproduct. We want things to be fair and equitable in our society, but it is really about not leaving stones unturned.
Exactly.
And making things function better.
Yes.
Okay.
There's no question that a diverse team is a stronger team. One of my favorite sayings is that when you look at getting anything done, right? My work is in a corporate environment, but I think this is true in any context, that the atomic unit, like the very basic unit, is a team, and that the team needs to be composed of people who see things differently and do things differently, and learning to work in that kind of a rich, sometimes seething pool of difference produces the most extraordinary things.
I believe that totally. Like in our work together on this podcast, like I said, we're very different. On the surface, we're very different. You're a woman, I'm a man. We're separated by a generation or so. We come from different backgrounds. And that's really enriched the way that we've approached this podcast and the things we've gotten to talk about. Another thing is the people we have access to. And the purpose of the podcast is to bring those people together. Anyway, just a little plug for the Fora. So what else was there that you wanted to ask about Shelley or that relationship, Cheryl?
What I want to dig into is, in your work with Shelley, you overcame many things, like looking at the packet of information you gave us. You overcame being women in a male-dominated field. You reached out to underprivileged communities and made computers accessible. There's a theme there of sort of overcoming challenges. If you look at your work with Shelley, what is the thing that you overcame that you're most proud of?
I guess I don't see it as us overcoming things. I think we always just viewed that we were just doing what we were passionate about doing, and we just, as a team, plowed forward. Occasionally there were obstacles that were put in our way, but we just overcame those obstacles. So I don't think we were in an overcoming mode the whole time. I think we were just pushing forward, doing what we believed in mode, and that's how come it worked. You know, there were a couple of little berries. One time we had a whole research team in multimedia. We had a group of doctoral students, probably close to 20 doctoral students at one time between the two of us. And some of the other people in the department were thinking that maybe our doctoral students weren't quite as rigorous because we were doing this interdisciplinary type research. And so they were, trying to put up barriers, making the comprehensive exam that all the doctoral students had to go through more difficult and so forth. But our students, they passed the comprehensive exam. So there were things like that. Again, it was probably as much the interdisciplinary nature of what we were doing as opposed to the hardcore computer science or engineering that everybody else was doing that was more looked on with askance than we were women, I think.
Dear listeners, we want to let you know how much we appreciate you listening to the Fora Podcast. We're learning and evolving with every episode that we record and produce. This would not be possible without your support and especially your feedback. We ask that you take advantage of the comment sections in both Spotify and YouTube to let us know what you loved and what we could do better. Now, let's step back into the Fora.
I asked you a similar question when we spoke earlier, and you said that some of your work was strategic, but you said mostly you really focused on what you thought was important.
Right. That's correct.
And that's how you got stuff done.
Right. And in terms of the strategic part, I mean, there were certain points when you're coming up for tenure, you're coming up for promotion, and so you want to be thinking, well, do I have the right things that I need for tenure and so forth? And so at the time when we both came up for tenure together, we had gotten two very good, very significant National Science Foundation grants. And so we also had done some research in journals too on some of the work we'd done with the Soviets in Soviet kids. So we had recognized work that was the stuff you had to have to get tenure. So we had that lined up in time. Similarly, when we both came up for promotion to full professor, at that point, we were diverging slightly in what we were focusing on, but I had an article that was in one of the national computing magazines. Shelley had articles and some other things. So we were somewhat strategic as well, but mainly just doing our work.
You saw an opening and you went for it.
I guess.
You mentioned your work with the Soviets. We've got a plastic bag on the table, and it's got maybe, it's got a big Pepsi logo on it, and then on the back, it's got maybe 20 different Pepsi logos, all with different languages. There's some Cyrillic here. Where'd this come from?
Well, that little plastic bag actually came from an exhibit, a USAID exhibit that was put across the Soviet Union, I think 8 different cities in the Soviet Union in 1988. Shelley was in one of those cities, and I was in another city, each one of us 8 weeks in the city we were in. These bags were given out to all the Russians who came to the exhibit. It says Informatica in the USA. It was basically computers in the USA. But what it really was an exhibit of American schools, American homes, American sports, American entertainment, all under the guise of how computers are used. So it was a kind of a positive propaganda about the U.S. into the Soviet Union in 1988. Shelley was the computer expert in one city, I was in another. As a result of that, we each were able to collect data from the 2 cities we were in, as well as data at the Smithsonian, to do a really interesting research project on the difference between Soviet attitudes toward computing and American attitudes toward computing.
So how did you get invited to Russia in the first place?
Because you went twice. This is from the second trip, correct?
Right. The first trip was in 1986. That was actually after our book had come out. And so we had been to a lot of international computer education conferences. We had met some Russian computer guys. And so the Soviet Academy of Science invited the 2 of us to come and talk to computer experts in the Soviet Union about how computers were used in the Soviet Union. So we actually lugged an Apple computer with us, which we almost didn't get back out of the country, but we did. I mean, they literally tried to take it from us at the airport when we were getting ready to leave. And I was hanging on to it, and Shelley said, "Don't let go." And so I'm hanging on to this computer while these guards are standing around me with Uzis. Meanwhile, she's calling the U.S. Embassy. She had her husband with her as well, and he had connections with the embassy. And so we got it straightened out, but it was sort of a riot that she's telling me not to let go of the computer with the guards standing around with guns. But anyway, it was an interesting experience giving talks in English and having it translated into Russian, about how we were starting to use computers, what the philosophy was of using computers with kids, because there were some very interesting different philosophies about how you use computers with kids at that time. So that's what we were talking about with them.
What were the findings? What were the differences?
Well, I alluded to them earlier. In some places, for example, in inner cities, where they could only afford to have one computer lab and one trained teacher, those kids were all doing drill and practice. And so they were math drill, and, they would brought in a computer lab and they would do drill and practice. In the suburbs where they had lots of money and there was a computer in every classroom, the students were doing high-level thinking skills. They were doing these simulations like Oregon Trails and some of these simulations where they were. So the difference is the computer running the child, or is the child running the computer? And so the paradigm that you want is the child, and that was the another book that we wrote was called Logo Worlds, about this logo language that was being taught to kids. And the purpose of that was for children to be put in control of the computer by programming, as opposed to sitting in front of a computer and having, because that's a bad model, to feel like you're being controlled by the computer, which is what the drill and practice model is. And so it's a whole philosophical, and the Europeans had an even different, they didn't even want their kids in front of computers until they were in middle school. They had a much more nature-based, they didn't want technology with the kids. So very different philosophies about computing around the world.
That's so interesting. I have 2 young girls, 3 years old, 10 months old. And parenting now, there's a big question about how much screen time your kid gets. And what I'm hearing is that the quality of the screen time is also very important. And that concept, the way you put it, of is the child running the computer or vice versa. I can think of very clear instances, I think, where those would be true. Can you think of specific examples or what to look for? And what does the child running the computer look like versus what does the computer running the child look like?
In high school and middle school, they're using spreadsheets. If they are using a tool to do their work, then they're controlling what's going on. If they're just sitting there passively and the computer's giving them problems to do and they're typing in answers, that I think is not, it's okay for some practice, but that's not the only way you want a kid to interact. You want the child to have a sense of control over the computer. And programming is another classic example. They program, they are in control.
So not treating the computer, even if you were, say, going to use it for educational purposes, not just watching TV, would be not like a worksheet where
exactly.
Do multiplication tables, enter
right.
the number, or it spits something out. It's having a task that is outside of the computer and using the computer to accomplish that task.
Could be word processing, could be spreadsheet, something like that. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I'm thinking about Duolingo. My children have used a thing called Membean for learning vocabulary, and they're all the mental model that you're describing of the kid gets a prompt and they get it right or wrong. And in fact, a lot of education, I think that the pedagogy, I think the idea behind it is a lot of this rote stuff is handled by computers in a way that is easy for teachers. They get a score, they know how the kid is
right.
doing. And maybe the philosophy is that they're using the time in the classroom differently.
Hopefully.
But I've never been a fan of those things. And it sounds like your position is the same, that is not the mode that we want our children interacting with computers.
It's okay if you need it for some small thing that you're just trying to teach spelling words, but it should not be the only way that kids interact. They need to, even some of these simulations where they have to figure out the amounts and, that's more active, where they're inputting their problem solving. They're using it to problem solve as opposed to just passively putting in answers right or wrong.
Yeah, I'm thinking a great example of a positive model is a financial fluency program that my kids were a part of, where they had to, pay rent and
Right.
pay their bills and things and maintain their credit score. And at the end of the year, if you had a perfect credit score, you got like an actual Target card. That's a much more active way
Yes.
of employing technology to skill build and sort of take charge as well.
You know, this reminds me of, we recorded an episode with my jiu-jitsu coach, Drew Foster. Jiu-jitsu, I don't know if you're familiar with it, a grappling martial art. And we talked a lot about the method of coaching that he's employing as of late. And it's all around problem solving, which the traditional method is all around drill, which you mentioned. And we've talked about the benefits of that. That's a funny crossover.
Yeah. So when you were in Russia, you were learning about how computers were used and you were sharing about computers in the United States, but you were doing other things too. I know that you were packing Bibles into Russia. And that's very consistent with this theme of creating access where there is none. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, actually, both Shelley and I, both in 1986 and 1988, she brought in Jewish paraphernalia when in the two places where she was. We were together in the first place and in different places the second time. And I would bring in Christian Bibles and Bible studies and things like that. And the first time was definitely way more adventurous than the second time. By 1988, things were starting to loosen up in the Soviet Union. The wall was about to come down. But in 1986, things were still very draconian, shall we say. And we were watched by the KGB constantly. Our rooms were monitored. So I went with actual instructions as to how I was to get rid of these Bibles once I got there.
What was it?
Back up one second. Can I ask, if you don't mind sharing, who are these instructions from? Like, who are you working with?
I had contacted somebody in the Washington, D.C. area who knew about smuggling Bibles into Russia. And I had gone to this special bookstore where there was some Russian as well. And I brought some English materials as well. And where there was this secret back room where there were Russian Bibles. So I had these Bibles. But the interesting, I brought my daughter with me too. My 16-year-old daughter. And we had these 3 suitcases, and my daughter and I, and we'd land in this airport, which is a special airport just for international people, with soldiers with Uzis all around, literally. And there happened to be this soccer team that came in on the plane with us, and they had all their stuff coming in, and they were going through all the soccer team stuff. And then there were the 3 suitcases that we brought. One of them had the Bibles and stuff. Another one had food in it because this was right after Chernobyl, and we had been told that the food might not be safe. So we had tuna fish and stuff like that. And then a lot of academic papers and things. So we put the 3 suitcases and I'm thinking, okay, here I am. What have I done? I've got my 16-year-old daughter. I see these men. This is not what I envisioned when I landed. This is what it's going to be like. What's going to happen? Well, fortunately, I did have my gorgeous 16-year-old daughter because she was such a distraction to the soldiers. And they only opened 2 of the suitcases that we brought, but they did not open the 3rd suitcase.
So you were not at all anticipating this type of security and treatment. You thought you were going to be
as
like
we were circling
airport.
the Moscow airport, I suddenly thought, all right, Lord, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but it's in your hands. So then we landed. We got to the hotel, and the next challenge is how the heck are we going to get out of the hotel to figure out to get these Bibles? Because I had been given this phone number to call, which I had coded backwards in the back of a little notebook because I had been told, do not have this phone number visible anyplace. So it turns out that you don't get any change or anything when you go in. At that point in the Soviet Union, they don't have maps, and they don't want you using their payphone, so you never get change. But the U.S. dime is the same size as the coin that fits in the Soviet. I had been told this ahead of time. So Jenny and I, my daughter, on this one afternoon, we had like a couple of hours, went around the corner, and they said, don't call from the hotel because that's dangerous. Went around the corner to a payphone, used a dime. It worked. I called this phone number. A man answers the phone, and I say, hello, I'm Dianne Martin, and I'm here to meet you. And they immediately break into English, and they said, okay, here's what you do. You're going to get on the subway. And, of course, neither of us spoke Russian at this time. My daughter, 2 years later, when she came with me, did. But at that point, you're going to get on the subway, and you're going to take it 4 stops, get off, get on the next train, go 3 stops, get off, and a man will meet you smoking a pipe. We got on the Moscow subway, which is like getting on this, it's moving at 50 miles an hour, moving down. I said, we're going to die. We get on the subway. We count because we can't read any signs. We count, we get off, we get on the next train, we count, we get off. We go up. Outside, there's this man leaning against a pole, smoking a pipe. I go up to him and I say, do you have the time? And he says, follow me. And we follow this man down this alley, around this building, up this stairs to this apartment. And that's where we give our Bibles to those people. And they're waiting for us. They have this lovely little tea and cake and everything. And they say, oh, you can't imagine what this means to us. Thank you so much. The young man who was there had a PhD in physics. He had been stripped of his PhD because he was a Christian. He was now working as an elevator operator. And so then we had to do the same. We had to get ourselves back, which we did, to the hotel in time before it was time for us to all go off to the circus with our Soviet guests.
That may be the most incredible story I've ever heard in my life.
And that's true. It's a true story.
I think you could have told a story about just taking the subway in Moscow, and that would have floored me. But this is incredible.
I just have to ask, when you got back to your hotel, how did you feel?
Did you sleep for 12 hours straight or something? I mean...
When we got back to the hotel, we had to get ready because we were being taken to the circus that night.
Literally a circus?
Yes.
And actually like a Russian circus.
A Russian circus. I mean, that was the event. I mean, it was literally this little rest time that we'd been given for 2 or 3 hours, and that was it. That was our only opportunity. Otherwise, we were going to be dragging those Bibles back home with us.
Were you reeling from the whole experience?
It wasn't until we were on the plane out of Russia that it literally hit me as to what had happened.
Wow. And how did you and Shelley get the idea that you were going to do this?
Well, I mean, I got it myself because it was just in my head that if I'm going to Russia, I'm going to bring Bibles, just because, I was a pretty fanatic Christian at the time. And Shelley similarly was committed because the Jews were not allowed to have their worship at that time. So she was committed to bringing some special worship objects that they could use, for their Shabbat meals and so forth. And she and Steve, her husband, took care of that. When we were in our separate cities in 1988, I do know that she was taken in an ambulance, which was subterfuge, to some secret location to give away her Jewish stuff at that point. I didn't have nearly that kind of drama the second time when I came in.
What floors me so much is one that is voluntary. It was an idea you had and you're
right.
committed to
We were
to
both
your faith.
committed to it, both of us, yes.
It's very, very courageous. And I think about, my daughter's almost 16. The idea of doing something like that, I hope that if I were presented with an opportunity that I would do just that. It's amazing.
For those listening, probably 7 times Cheryl and I have just looked at each other with our mouths open and shook our heads, just struggling to have words to keep this thing going. Because I'm so floored by that story. That's incredible.
And what is amazing to me is that I don't think I knew these things. I was 17 when that happened, and I just could not grasp the magnitude of what you were doing. I think that's true looking now at all these things that you've shared with us about your career and your life that I was entirely unable to appreciate. The beauty of the things that you did at those times.
It's funny. Also, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, so Jehovah's Witnesses have a history of doing exactly what you're talking about, and it's one of those experiences that I've had read articles about and seen videos about, and people doing this and risking, life and limb to do this. But I've never met somebody in person, and you told it in such a rich way. It's so exciting.
And while we're on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, I think we should talk about Dubai.
Yeah. Is it Zayed University?
Uh-huh.
Zayed University.
Yes.
Tell us about your work there.
Well, I had the opportunity, that was 2005 to 2007. I was recruited to go to Dubai to work at Zayed University as the Dean of the College of Information Technology. This was a university that was founded by Sheikh Zayed. He founded the UAE back in 1998. And so he was this uneducated Bedouin who had this vision to educate the women in the Emirates. And he felt it was important, but he wanted it in the Emirates. He would not send them abroad because the women are very protected in the Emirates. So I was invited to come over and be the dean at Zayed, which was a women's university, because they brought in all Western faculty and Western deans and so forth to set up a Western university for the women. They invited me to come over because they had a couple of deans before that had been men, and that there was just not a lot of interest among the young women in information technology and computing. So they thought if they had a female dean, that might get them excited, because they really did want, they had a business school, they had an education school, they were trying to develop some professional women, and they thought that they should have some women in technology. So I went over, and because I love teaching, I was a teaching dean. I would teach every semester this introductory course, which was kind of a recruiting course to get girls, they called them girls, the young women, interested in the technology. And so by the end of the 2 years, we had 250 young women in information technology. But it was very exciting to me, because the first thing I did in this course is I would say, draw a picture of a computer scientist. And they would all draw this geeky guy picture, you know. And then at the end of the course, after we'd gone through all the possibilities and the career options in technology for them, they would make posters, and they all were these posters that showed pictures of young women like them, you know, being computer security experts, being techie programmers. And so it was like they now were visualizing themselves in that field, as opposed to only the geeky guys in the field. And some of those young women still communicate with me. Some of them are now professors and deans themselves. They're working in businesses, so they have gone on to be professionals.
I'm imagining the globe with dots of all the people that you've touched in your career. And I've had the pleasure and the privilege of having a similar career. Not, you know, I feel in awe of the things that you've accomplished, but I have also worked all over the world. And I feel so privileged to know that in some way I've left fingerprints in some of the places that I've worked. And every now and then I hear something from someone, and it's such a delight. When you reflect on all those people, what do you think about that? All those people that you've touched in some way.
Well, I just think that that's the mission of any teacher, and any teacher will reflect back on all hundreds and hundreds of students, undergraduate students, graduate students, doctoral students who've become professors now themselves. You know, you think back, and that's what your mission is. Your mission is to unleash that potential. And I just feel like that is a kind of a legacy, although it's sort of like hundreds and hundreds of other little children out there that have gone through, you know, that I've been able to help educate.
And to me, the pinnacle of teaching is not teaching people to do something or to know something, but teaching them the passion that you also have for teaching others to learn, teaching others to create, teaching others to touch others in some other way, which is amazing.
I'm curious. So I gave you a pretty hard question to think about when we were talking, getting to know each other before the podcast. And it was, if there's a lesson you want your students to take away from your career, what would that lesson be?
Well, I think the lesson is to follow your passion, to do what you really want to do. You know, if you're passionate about what you work, then you'll never work a day in your life. And here I am still working, but I'm not feeling like I'm working, because I'm, you know, passionate about what I do. I love teaching. And I think if you follow what you think is right. Now, another important part of my career has been working in the area of computer ethics. And so that's an important piece that I have tried to communicate to all of my students, is the importance of ethical work, you know, being that the systems you create will not have negative impacts on people, that you are contributing to human flourishing. And so I think, to me, that's the message, that whatever you do, that it's something you're passionate about, but it's also contributing to human flourishing. It's not something that would cause a harm to somebody else.
Is there a lesson from your career that you would pass along? You think about, I know your grandchildren are heading out into the world. My children are heading out into the world. Is there a lesson that you would offer them?
Well, right now, of course, what I'm saying to my grandchildren is stay safe. And I do think about them and pray about them every day. But as what I've tried to impart to them, because I did help to homeschool them for 3 years when I first got down here in North Carolina, was, you know, the importance of integrity and honesty and in the work that you're doing, and making sure that it's your work and not somebody else's work. And my granddaughter just graduated from college, and she had a very good academic career, and now my grandson is going to his junior year. And I know he's very passionate. He's into music production. He's very passionate about what he's doing. So I feel like this idea of really going into something that you really like and enjoy is important, and doing it well and making sure you harm no one else.
Appreciate you sharing that. And I'm going to go in a little bit more of a heady direction. Right now, you teach a course at UNC Chapel Hill on ethics specific to AI. Can you tell us a little bit about what that course is about? And then I want to ask you about transhumanism.
Well, the course that I teach, I teach an online course for George Washington University called Information Policy. That's a graduate level course, and that gets into some ethics. And we definitely talk about AI in that, because that cuts across policies and everything, whether it's intellectual property, free speech, privacy, cybercrime, all, it's tied up in all that.
The basics of which you can find in bits and bytes. That's what I found so compelling about this, was that it's all so pertinent to today. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. Go ahead.
That's okay. And then the UNC course is an undergraduate course in computer and information ethics. And 2 years ago, I actually had to add a whole module to both of those courses about AI. And what I did is I actually put it in the very first part of the course after I do the introductory stuff, because I feel like AI casts its shadow across all the other topics we talk about. So I have a module about AI, and then we talk about AI in all of the other modules. What's the impact of AI now in privacy, in intellectual property, in free speech, in cybercrime, or whatever it is that we're talking about. So it does cut across all the topics. So it's almost like what used to be 2 dimensionals now a third dimension. It's a third dimension in what I'm teaching.
I know this is really pertinent to your work, Cheryl. It's you're working with teams and organizing people, and AI is a big part of that. And you mentioned that that there are certain challenges you're having in integrating that into the courses that you build.
It's really just how to stair-step people into using these tools in a way that is more than just like reducing friction and increasing productivity. I think that the hard part about using AI is to know what is appropriate to use AI for and what is not. And I think we can see, there's a lot of content that I get invited, many times a week to follow people as thought leaders. I'm using air quotes here, who are using AI to create stuff that they think is thought leadership. And I think it's easy to swing from sort of the heady excitement of, I can do very basic things much more quickly and with higher quality, like, let's say, write emails or, very rudimentary tasks, to what are the things that are uniquely human that we need to retain. I mean, for instance, I would never use AI to write a blog for the Fora, because those come from my heart. And there is no point in me offering something like that is made by a machine. And there's an ethical element of it. How are these machines in service to what we want to do? And how do we keep close to the heart the things we should?
So transhumanism, right?
Did you set that up, Kenan?
I took a swing. So you mentioned this idea of transhumanism. Tell me if I get this correct. It's the idea that people will integrate so much with machines and computers that eventually humans would be able to be sort of limitless in their abilities and live forever.
There are a whole group of people out in Silicon Valley who are spending a lot of money on this whole idea that they can achieve technological immortality. Now, as a Christian, I have my own idea what immortality is, and it sure is not loading my brain on the internet, I can tell you that. So transhumanism means going beyond our biological bodies. They see the biology as being our limitation, and we're going to transcend our biological limitations and be able to stay forever kind of out there in cyberspace by having our brains, our thinking, all of our ideas uploaded onto the internet. C.S. Lewis actually wrote about this back in the 40s, and he had a trilogy, a science fiction trilogy, which I do use science fiction a lot in my teaching, by the way. So the science fiction trilogy where he had this image of this head in a jar, with all these fluids. But it was a horrible, horrible existence. I mean, that head was living on, but it was immobile, no control. So a loss of autonomy, a loss of agency. I don't consider that immortality. I consider that a horrible technological prison. So there's a lot of controversy now around whether death is just a disease to be conquered and this is how we're going to conquer it, or from the Christian perspective, you pass through death and you do go into eternity, but not by loading your brain on the internet. A different view of immortality.
It is interesting that if I think about the big technical revolutions, that in each case there is like a struggle between the technology and what it means for humans and the basics of the human condition. Mm-hmm. And what strikes me about your career and the stories that you've told is you've been very heart-led. You know, your story of smuggling Bibles into the USSR, for instance, like maybe not even really knowing why or the real, or, you know, just feeling like it was something you were compelled to do, but also your work with Shelley and helping make computers accessible and inviting in people who maybe would not have been at the table. I'm curious about your life now, because I know you to be, you know, to lead a very rich life with many, many things going on. How is that, you know, sort of sense of heart and your passions, how does that play into what you're doing now?
Well, I'm still doing some teaching, so that passion is still being realized. But since I moved to Chapel Hill, I've gotten involved kind of in civic affairs and community affairs. I'm involved in some of the racial justice issues in my community and housing and educational equity. And so I'm very committed to some of those equity issues. That's what I'm doing.
That's a very engaged life for anyone. How have you sustained, you know, your energy for this, into your 8th decade, your 9th decade, right? We're counting in the 9th decade now.
That's true. I'm 82.
Where does your energy come from?
Exercise.
I love to hear that.
Yeah, you're not going to get any arguments against exercise in this room. On this podcast. That's great. What's your exercise routine like, and what do you get out of it?
Well, I do lead 3 exercise classes a week. And on the off days, I do power walks with weights, and I do push-ups and I do planks. You know, I try to do the things that keep the whole body strong, keep muscle mass, keep bone mass. Those are the 2 important things when you get old. So I would say exercise, and of course the spiritual, that's the other part. So the physical is the exercise, and the spiritual is just my contemplation and my relationship with God. It's
so great to talk to somebody whose career has been computer sciences and yet have such a human story. It's been lovely. Cheryl, is there anything else?
I'm curious, as you look at the arc of your life, which is long and far-reaching, what you hope people will remember you for.
Well, I guess there's the personal and the professional. So I guess professionally, I think I will be remembered because I was very instrumental in helping bringing the whole idea of computer ethics into the computer science curriculum, so that now anyone who's a computer science major has to take some ethics. And so I think that's, from a professional perspective, that's really important, and that's kind of a legacy. And I guess from a personal perspective, I guess I just hoped that I will be remembered as somebody who tried to be the best person I could be and do no harm.
I'm sure that people think way past that. I just want to say, as a young woman who grew up in your sphere, that you had a tremendous impact on me. You were really my role model as a professional woman, and a woman who was both professional and also very invested and involved in her family. And in your generosity to me, even during my college years, where I lived with you for a time, was transformational. And I'm sure that women and men are counted in thousands who have that gratitude for you.
Thank you.
Dianne, if this story really, really compels somebody and they want to share what they got out of it with you, is there a way that they can contact you, maybe via email or something like that, just to ask you a question or tell you how much this podcast meant to them?
They want to send me an email, that would be fine. dmartin@gwu.edu.
Thank you so much for being here.
C. Dianne Martin, thank you so much.
Thank you.